Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the Jason Damico show once again, and special thanks to all the platforms, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, iHeart, Simplecast for hosting and being great platforms for podcast content. And this is, I'm really looking forward to this episode. Been following this guest who's going to be on for a while. And some of you may already have heard of the name and know of his work. He's very, very well known in the philosophy side of YouTube. Our guest is the president and co-founder of the company Reason.io. He's earned a MA and a PhD in philosophy from Southern Illinois University of Carbondale and has taught philosophical studies at various educational institutions over the years. We'll get more into that. And he's well known for his philosophy-focused YouTube channel that has over 80,000 subscribers and reached nearly 8 million views at this point. And he's also an editor of Stoicism Today, the producer of the half-hour Hegel series, and the president of his local Sophia, which is the Society of Philosophers in America chapter. Please welcome to the show my friend that I can say now because we've kind of met face-to-face through Zoom, Dr. Gregory Sadler.
Yeah, and you can just call me Greg if you want to.
We'll go. I want to make it official, but Greg, it's great to have you, and thanks so much for booking this a month in advance, and here we are.
Well, I mean, the booking a month in advance, I think, was because I ended up having to reschedule it, right? I got too busy or something. And
I think we had it scheduled for, it was still a month out. I think we had it for yesterday. And
that makes sense.
There really wasn't anything crazy as far as booking wise, just a day after, but grateful that you're here.
Thanks. Yeah, I might have gotten confused because it's been a super busy semester, in part because of this big, I'm sure you're aware, transition to online learning because of COVID and all of that. I mean, some of my classes were already online, but we still had students who were online in my classes and then had all these obstacles and challenges that they were facing, having to move back home out of the dorms, so right. It was sort of like being a cowboy having to herd a bunch of cats, like they say,
Well, I got my whole business degree online from 2013 to I graduated last year. So in between being in the entertainment world and having the band and touring and being on set with acting projects, still getting the degree online. And it's some of my friends have called me up like, man, how did you do this? It's this online thing. And I have a homeschooling background, so I was quite used to it. I actually kind of liked the self-actualized type of
self-directed.
Yeah. And I actually prefer it in some ways, but would have loved to have been in one of your courses in the classroom. I'll tell you that.
Well, I do offer online courses in my Study with Sadler Academy that's out there on the net. I have to add more courses to it. But we have all sorts of online events as well. I was thinking as you're saying that, though, online students are often people who are in professional life and they're doing all sorts of things and they like the flexibility of being able to work at things outside of a campus and outside of normal campus hours. But to do the stuff that you were doing, especially going on tour and to complete an online degree, that's some serious dedication there.
It was crazy.
Yeah,
it was lunacy. It was crazy. But I'm glad I did it. I quit. I almost quit multiple times, and I looked up to folks and family members around me, those that finished their education, those that didn't, and unanimously they were saying, just keep doing it. So, yeah.
I imagine. Feel free to say, that's none of your business if you want to, but there were probably a lot of times where you had to let the stick with the good and not let the perfect be the enemy of the good, where you're like, well, this is good enough. I don't need to get every single point on every single thing in every single way, because that'll drive you nuts.
I wish that I espoused that more. I'll be honest with you.
Are you a bit of a perfectionist?
Well, I graduated summa cum laude, so
that's excellent. Yeah,
it is. But at the same time, it just proves your point, because looking back, there were some things career-wise that did kind of, they didn't progress quite as quickly as they, in theory, could have. But again, from a determinism point of view,
yeah,
maybe everything does happen for a reason,
Yeah, and the thing that really matters with education in general is what sticks with you down the line. The credentialing is nice, right? It opens up doors for you. But I see this with a lot of my students. I'll tell you a story in a minute about teaching
Sure.
business ethics at Marquette. I see this with quite a few students where they've spent a lot of money on classes, and just a semester later they don't remember very much. When I was teaching business ethics the first time at Marquette face-to-face, it was a class that I taught previously at other places. I figured, well, I can draw on the fact that all these students have had a regular ethics class before that. Now, Marquette has since gotten rid of that. They've changed their core. But I figured, well, okay, we're not going to begin at ground zero the way we usually do in business ethics classes, where they don't have any exposure to this and we have to go through every single thing.
Right.
So I polled the students and I said, okay, when did you last have your class? And it was anywhere from last semester to 2 years ago. And I was like, well, okay, that's not bad. We can probably work with this. And then I went down each line of desks, and I was like, what do you actually remember from the class? And I was shocked at how little they actually had held on to. And I was like, wow, if they were only paying, say, $500 for this class at a community college, maybe that wouldn't be that big of a thing. But these kids paid $5,000 for this class, and they don't remember any of it. So what good did it do them? And it was a core class, so they had to get through it, and they probably took it as freshmen because their advisor signed them up for it. But they missed this really valuable opportunity. And so then when we had the actual class, we were really drilling on how do you understand this theory? What are the components of it? How do you apply it? And I'd make them work at applying it to their own lives and what their career was intended to be. And hopefully some of them have retained something from it. I always tell my students, I don't care about evaluations, because I've been teaching so long that they're not going to fire me for evaluations, right? And I usually get good ones anyway.
Right.
But I ignore them, and I tell them, when you're out in the world, whether it's business students or fashion majors or nursing students, when you run into a situation where you actually use something from our class, whether it was business ethics or just straight out ethics or intro to philosophy or something, I want you to email me or send me a message in LinkedIn and say, hey, I found this useful. And don't even worry whether you got it right or not. Maybe you forgot half of the concept, but I just want to know that you're actually still using it. And I do get a lot of emails from the students. Admittedly, some of them have garbled it up a little bit, but it's sticking with them. And for me, that's the index that I use for success. It'd be sort of like as a musician, if somebody's whistling your song, the melody from it, a year after they've heard your tracks, that's a sign that it really has staying power, right?
For sure. That's a great analogy. And I think this could go off. I haven't even hit the first bullet point yet. This is all great content though already, because the education system, I think you would agree with me, there's just certain things that just don't stick anymore or haven't stuck for years.
Yeah.
And that opens up a whole can of worms of reform, and we don't need to go in that direction of conversation, but I'd love to get your opinion on that, or anything that you've seen success with that you've been able to implement over the years and change.
Well, it's interesting. We don't actually have an education system, not like other countries do, where things are kind of standardized and top down. Instead, we do have a Department of Education, and they have some guidelines, but then each state has its own standards, and each, school district, or, like where my kids go, school corporation, because it's all run by corporations in Indiana, has its own way of doing things. And even within the same county, they're not on the same map with each other. So there isn't really, and then we have, of course, like you mentioned, homeschooling and private schools of all different sorts. So there's no real system in place. And I think a lot of people, if they come up with a particular educational subsystem, like this school district, they think it must be like this everywhere. And then they go somewhere else and it's like going to Mars, And, you're right. There's a lot of stuff that could be studied that has just kind of dropped out. Some of it's due to budget cuts, and some of that is stuff that I really liked when I was in school. I wasn't a good student, so my favorite classes were like music, art, gym.
Right.
the stuff that's getting cut in a lot of places,
Yeah.
But we don't have a geography being taught in a lot of places, and that puts a lot of our students at a disadvantage. I think civics has kind of fallen by the wayside, and
for sure,
quite a few social studies curricula. Philosophy doesn't get taught at all,
which is a shame, in my opinion, that it wasn't until, for me, scholastically speaking, in college, thank God my college, even though I was a business major, that they shed light on the subject, because I was always a fan of it, but never was really exposed to it in school until then.
I was exposed to it, but our philosophy class in the Catholic high school that I went to was just terrible. And it would have turned me off on philosophy had I not had another class that wasn't a philosophy class, that was taught by a guy who was interested in philosophy, who taught us Plato and Aristotle and Augustine.
Right.
And then when I got to college, I just sort of I declared the major because my mom's boyfriend had said, well, you want to declare a major right away so you're not just Joe Freshman. I looked down the list and I was like, well, philosophy sounds cool. I'll do that. And things kind of fortunately fell into place.
Wow.
But yeah, most of my students, when they come into a philosophy class, they are anxious. Some of them are terrified because they just know philosophy is really hard stuff. And are they going to be capable of understanding this? They know a few names like, there's Plato and Socrates and this Descartes guy who I've seen in memes,
And they come in saying Descartes, not Descartes,
exactly. Yeah. There's a lot of that, and I don't get on their case if they mispronounce things, because think about Socrates, right? So he wasn't called Socrates; it would have been Socrates.
Right.
But we're not going to be like sticklers and get on people's cases. I mean, some people do. Some people that's what their classroom environment's really about, making sure that we're with things. I kind of like for people to learn things, so. More likely to learn if you're not being a hard case with them and being supportive. But yeah, you're right. It would be nice if we had some introduction to it, like other countries do. Like France, with Portugal. I think it's like 10th and 11th grade, and it might not be a good class, but at least it's a class.
Right.
So yeah,
some sort of exposure to it.
Exactly. Yeah. Laying a bit of groundwork. That would be helpful. But, we could say this about so many other things too, that we don't have in our curriculum that would be nice to introduce students to. And then then they have to go to school for 15 years instead of 12. So
I know,
there's a downside to that.
I know you're a music fan from what I've seen online, and we'll definitely talk about metal in a second, because you've got
good.
You have like a metal show, right?
Yeah, well, we call it Classic Metal Class, and we were kicking around ideas. And when I say we, I mean me and my co-host Scott Cerulli, who's at Berklee School of Music and
cool.
gigging musician, and yeah, he's a really great guy. He and I have gotten to be really good friends over the years. And so, class, okay, that sounds pretty academic, but chat is a little bit too informal. And I think there was another word we were kicking around as well. So we wound up sticking with class, and we've only had 2 sessions so far because we're doing it once a month. First was on like, what's the origin of heavy metal? And then we talked about the Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, Nexus kicking out all these
Oh
great bands like
yeah.
Rainbow and
Oh yeah.
yeah. And we're going to talk about some metaphysical issues, like when does a band cease to be that band? Like if you have a band that has no original members left, it's essentially a tribute band, but if it has one, does it count? It kind of depends. If it's Uriah Heep and it's Mick Box, I think so. If it's some other bands and it's somebody who's not, like, good example is Thin Lizzy. I like Scott Gorham, and he's not an original member because Gary Moore was the original guitarist, but he was, after Gary Moore left, it was him and Brian Robertson, I think, who went afterwards to Motorhead for an album.
Yeah.
And Scott Gorham is still there, and he can, it's still called Thin Lizzy, but it's not really Thin Lizzy without Phil Lynott. He was so central to the band. So we're going to explore metaphysical issues like that. Or I don't know if you followed the controversy, the legal controversy about Rat, when they were like suing each other over who could actually use the name.
Yeah.
So, Rat with Bobby Blotzer, the original drummer, versus Rat with 3 original members. I kind of think that the 3 original members one is the metaphysical continuity of the band, and Bobby Blotzer.
Happened with Guns N' Roses, right? With Axl and Slash, and but they ended up doing the Velvet Revolver thing with Scott, and it turned out okay.
Yeah, and there's other bands that have been like caught up in that. Queensryche is an example. Jeff Tate, who's pretty important,
pretty damn.
And then you got all the other guys, and so there were 2 Queensryches for a while. I think there still might be,
One of the most egregious to me is, and I'm a huge Grand Funk fan. With Mark Farner and Don Brewer and Mel, and just what happened with that, and I won't go into crazy detail about it, but how they essentially, from what I've heard, Mark got booted out in a really transfixed, slick way, kind of nefarious, and he couldn't use the name. So he's toured as Mark Farner from Grand Funk Railroad. So he can't use any of the, and it's just like, and they've been in and out of court for over 20 years over this. And it's just like, man, it's crazy. It's like everybody online is like, it's not Grand Funk without Mark Farner. It's just not,
They must have used up a lot of like income from all their different sources in fighting these lawsuits then.
I'm sure.
That's
and
too
that
bad.
band, the history of that band is insane. What they were doing in 69 and 70, and it was because of some of the internal issues that were occurring and management issues that things just kind of dissolved after the mid 70s.
Yeah,
they were essentially bigger than Zeppelin at one point during that time frame. Yeah, and it's selling out Shea Stadium faster than the Beatles. Like it's just, and that starts a whole other conversation of the music industry in general. we don't need to go down that road, but we'll get into. I'm trying to remember why I brought up metal. I don't even remember why, but anyway, nice little segue, nice little sidebar there.
Yeah, and it's been a central part of my identity since I was a kid. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and so we would hear stuff that later on we recognized as metal on the radio, or like we're playing Kiss records or stuff like that when we were like 5, 6, 7, 8, like in elementary school. And then when metal like swamped the United States in the early 80s, I think a lot of us were primed especially since we're, young boys, pretty violent, and to sort of, pick up on this stuff and really make it part of our musical palette, you could say. And I got out of it for a while in the 90s, as everybody moved to like grunge and the alternative thing. And there were some metal bands that really made that work, like Tool or Alice in Chains or Helmet. And they were a lot of fun. But then it was actually watching those VH1 documentaries. They did like a 4-part series, and this is back when cable was still big, and like they'd play these things. And I was starting to teach, my first job teaching at the maximum security prison, and I watched these documentaries late at night, and I'd hear the music, and I was like, that stuff was actually pretty good. I should give it another listen. And so then I got back into like buying, CDs, because they were still selling them at that time, of like the Scorpions or Kiss or Motorhead. And then I got back into it that way. And then Pandora, when that first came out, man, that changed everything, because growing up, I don't know where you grew up, but I grew up here in Wisconsin and kind of out in the sticks. So it's not like, say growing up in New York City, where you would have known about all the different metal bands and you could actually have bought Kerrang or something like that. And so you'd be well informed about the genre. We had what we could get at Target or Kmart or, the local record store that might have a few imports. And we could get Circus and Hit Parader, and that's how we learned about these things. And then bands would tour. So, you had a lot of like people like trading tapes and things like that, but your background was kind of limited. And so Pandora, when it came out in the 2000s, I was able to hear all these bands that I might have heard mentioned before, but I'd never heard their music. And, then get into a lot of stuff that I'd missed out on. No, there's no philosophical import to that.
Sure. Well, it's funny that you bring up Kiss. That was the item that I forgot about. That was why I brought up metal.
Oh, okay.
It's because Gene Simmons, he's put out some books. I don't know if you've read any of them.
No, I haven't.
They're fascinating. They're really, really fascinating. And one of the main things that he talks about, it's like a main stem in each one of his books, is the lack of, like, I guess you could call it the habituals, as far as budget keeping.
Oh,
just like basic functionality of life. And he goes into a couple of rants in his books, and they're chock full of some juicy insights from Gene Simmons. I think you'd really, really enjoy some of his books.
And I mean, is his point that like he paid attention to those things and other people in the music industry weren't paying attention to those, or like,
he's typical... questioning, why is it not in the school system? Why is it not why is it not there at a high school level?
That makes perfect sense. Actually, I'll tell you, this is going to be a bit of a digression, but it's a really interesting thing that my wife got involved in here in the Milwaukee school district. So my wife worked for 10 years at the Culinary Institute of America. And she's not a chef, although she's an incredible cook and has had her own catering company in the past here in Milwaukee. But she, her background is in labor studies and philosophy and literature, and she became the first person to have what they call a Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning at the Culinary. And a CETL is essentially you teach the teachers. So you coach the chefs who are really great practitioners how to be better educators. So that was her job. And now she still works for them, but as a contractor for their food business school, which is an online spin-off of the CAA. So when we got back here in Milwaukee, because that's where both of us are from, she started looking around for people in the food scene. And Milwaukee actually has a food scene right now that's like getting international acclaim. Well, pre-COVID. Now nobody's doing anything, but it's kind of like a hidden gem. And one of the things that they were doing was they, in the high schools, they'll have culinary arts programs, what we used to call home ec, but now it's a little bit more advanced. And they have kitchens, and a lot of times these things are set up in such a way, and they're supported in such a way as they're kind of like for the screw up kids, sort of like when we'd have shop or stuff like that. Um, but they could be a lot better. So they started doing this thing where they would pair a chef out in the Milwaukee food scene who's got their own restaurant with a culinary arts instructor. And then my wife would be, structuring the entire program, overseeing that, bringing everybody together, saying how you would teach this stuff. So they did this, and they did it as a pilot program, and it was quite successful. And the idea was you take these kids who would otherwise be kind of falling through the cracks, and you get them interested in culinary arts, and you get them to see that there's a job trajectory for them if they can keep on this work, and they can go anywhere that they want in the United States, because anywhere you go, there's kitchens.
Right.
So it never actually happened, but the proposal for doing something next was going to be taking teachers who would teach practical finance stuff, and then bringing in local bankers to talk about what a mortgage is, and why you don't need to get all these credit cards and stuff like that for the students. Now, I mean, that's an amazing idea. It was going to be another pilot program. I think those practical life skills things are, absolutely essential, because, if you're unlucky, you have parents who don't teach you that, and then you got to learn the hard way. That's the way I learned, in part because my dad died when I was young, and my mom wasn't particularly good at that sort of thing. And, but it would have been so much more helpful, I suppose, if I'd been willing to listen. I also had a problem with not listening to my teachers, but had that stuff been available in high school, I think I would have made a lot better financial decisions.
Yeah, it's you look at the periodic table, and there's just so many folks that don't choose that as a career choice, but everybody
becoming chemists.
right. But everybody's got a bank account, and
right.
the basic principles of, and to me, the same thing, like, and we were talking with a guest earlier this week, good friend of mine, and she's into health and wellness and mindfulness therapy, and it's just just basic psychology elements as well that really aren't talked about much until college. I feel like at some point a little bit earlier on, it would maybe be helpful. It would have been helpful.
Yeah, we got a little bit of that stuff in a class that was just called health, that you had to take like in 10th grade. But it was like sandwiched in there with like all the different kinds of drugs and what they do and why you're not supposed to take them. And then some sex ed stuff. And I don't remember what else we had in there. I learned more about that sort of stuff from my track coach, because every day before we would go out and do our stuff, we'd do our stretching, and then he'd say, okay, everybody lay on your back. And then for like 10 minutes, he would do like a mindfulness exercise with us. And I didn't know that it was called that at the time. And I don't know where he got it from. He was a really cool guy, Chuck Bova. And I actually owe a lot of, what I learned about exercise and getting through life to that guy. He probably had more influence on me than any other teacher I had, quite frankly. But I was one of those kids who, gym classes, like I said, one of my favorite classes. But yeah, he, if you don't get it in these kind of weird ad hoc ways, you're just not going to get this stuff. And then you may not even get in college. So you mentioned I'm editor of Stoicism Today, and Stoicism is a ancient Greek philosophy that is kind of having a renaissance right now, and it's connected up with what people are doing in mindfulness. It's not exactly the same, but there's a lot of techniques for like learning how to manage your emotions and make good decisions in your life. And you could take college philosophy classes and never encounter that. a lot of people have said that, well, I took, this entire curriculum and we never studied the Stoics. So even when you do get the real stuff, you sometimes, depending on who's teaching it or setting it up, you don't get exposed to the stuff that would be really practical and helpful.
Well, let's talk about that then for a second. The kind of
Sure.
merge into the philosophy side of things. You touched a little bit on your beginning stages as far as it was more or less just picking philosophy, and then things kind of fall into place for you, which is, that's amazing. I know you have a little bit of a military background just from other videos that I've seen you talk about. I don't know too much about that. I don't know how much that ties into your story, but yeah, I mean, just talk a little bit about the journey from signing up for philosophy and how things progressed.
Okay. Well, I mean, a lot of it is just, it's a story that has a happy ending, but it's not because I made the right decisions. It's a lot of things happening to come together, fortunately, at certain points. And yeah, I did go into the military. In fact, when I was in high school, I had no plans to go to college at all. I wanted to go in the military and either like be a lifer or get out and be a mercenary, because a buddy of mine actually had an uncle who was a mercenary. And so we had these contacts, and it was, it was the 80s. So we were facing the Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact, and, we watched Red Dawn over and over and over again. And we're kind of into all this macho stuff. And so I didn't do any of the college prep stuff that I could have done, not even taking like the PSAT. And so it was actually I'll tell you a really funny story. So we get to graduation for our high school, and I'd been in a lot of trouble here and there to the point where I actually, at one point, was a ward of the court. My mom filed an uncontrollability petition, it was called, against me, that said, I can't handle this guy. You do what you want to do with him. And so my high school, career was kind of checkered, you could say. And I was in with a bunch of other people who, we used to back then talk about the burnouts, the people who wore like denim or leather jackets and listened to heavy metal, and some of us engaged in criminal activity, and quite a few that were into drugs, and sort of kind of a rough crowd. And quite a few of them were going into the military. So it all kind of fit together. When I went to graduation, we all went across the stage and got our diploma, and I think shook somebody's hand, probably the principal. And then they had these awards, and they called me up for an award. And it was a complete surprise to me. And they said, it was, I don't remember exactly what it was called, but it was something like for succeeding despite the odds. Which is a bit of a backhanded compliment, right? So you did succeed, but it's because you're a screw up, that you get an award like that.
Good luck for that trying to be a thing now in like 2020. It's just it never happened. Shows you the cultural change.
It was from a law firm, and it was like it came with a $700 check.
Oh,
and then the intention was you were supposed to like spend that, I don't know, buying books at college or something like that. So I spent it on tuition at a karate dojo. And then I would go, like 3 hours a day and train. It was the one in here, if anybody knows, locally in downtown Waukesha, run by this guy Neil Stolzmark and his Shoin-ryu. And it was really nice school, and I progressed quite along, and I was doing that until I was going to go in the military. And so that's what I blew all that money on. And worked, I think at that time I was working as a cook in a Ponderosa. And then I went in the military, and I wasn't in for very long. I actually got out in the budget cuts of 1990, because while I was there, the wall came down. And suddenly nobody knew what we're supposed to do with the military anymore. The Russians, they're Soviet Union is falling apart. They'd kicked all the Easterners had kicked them out, and maybe we wouldn't need so many troops anymore. This is right before the Gulf War. And so they were like cutting people like crazy. Officers actually had quotas, and they were sending all these, these, like, our platoon sergeants would get kicked out for this or that. So when they said, well, do you want to leave? I was like, yeah, that'd be fine. So I got out, and then I started working in a restaurant again, that time at a pizza restaurant, and attending bar. And, by that time I'd actually started playing bass too.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, here's another
no, by all
story.
means.
So I got in trouble when I was in the Army too. Surprise, surprise. And I lost my rank a couple times for fighting with people in the barracks.
Oh boy.
And I had to do what was called extra duty, which means that you're stuck on post, and then they like make you go pick up cigarette butts or, sweep extra stuff and all that. And there were a bunch of us who were the extra duty guys. And so we would hang around, it was called like the rec center or something. And the military has tons and tons of money to spend on things like that. So they had like these Marshall stacks, and one of the guys played guitar. And he goes in there and he's like, oh man, there's a guitar there and all these amps and speakers. And so he's like, I'm going to start playing. And there was a mic for another guy to sing and a drum kit. And then there was a bass guitar. And they were like, you could probably play the bass. Like the old stereotype of the bassist, it's like the dumb guy in the group who, like the little brother or something, because the bass is easy. I mean, it's not quite true, but right. As it turned out, I was able to play the bass. And so, I'd go and get tablature, and we played some songs, and we made a band called the Extra Duty Guys. And so I actually took a Fender P&J bass right out of the case. It had never been played before. They must have blown like thousands of bucks on this instrument. It was like really, really nice, And so, I'm plunking away at it, a complete amateur, And then when I got out, I went to a pawn shop, and I bought the bass that I still have. It's a cheap Area Pro 2, and got myself a practice amp, and, started playing. And so that's what I was doing. I was working in the restaurant and playing bass and drinking and, and after a while I was like, this is not a bad life, but I probably should do something more with my life. Let's go to college. And I had no idea where I should go, or, I mean, I had good test scores. And my dad, who unfortunately died when I was young, had gone to UW-Madison. So my mom was really keen on me to go there. But she also had a boyfriend who was an alum of one of the local colleges. And so he got me a application, and I filled it out, and they accepted me and brought me in and gave me a scholarship because I had the high test scores that would like make their average look better. And because I had been in the military, I was considered legally independent. So I could, get more financial aid. And, college, I can't say that I really applied myself that much. I spent a lot of time partying and playing cards and playing bass and working out. But it was the college experience. And I was the subject of what I like to call benign neglect. So we had professors, and these professors probably didn't care about anything. They would teach their classes, and they were like 50 years behind the times when it came to philosophy. But they would let you do what you wanted to do. So I would go to the library, and nobody had told me that I should do things any differently. And I'd get books that I thought were interesting and read them and talk about them with a few students who were interested in that sort of thing. And it turned out to work out for me. And then I went to graduate school, and it was kind of a similar experience, only a little bit more coordinated, a lot of benign neglect, not a lot of career planning or anything like that. And, got my PhD. And I think the only person who actually read my dissertation all editor, who was a historian. I don't think the other people actually read the full thing, but they passed me. And, I got to teach, and I liked teaching. And then it was, 2002 when that happened, when I got out. And so by then my mom had died. And so I had this inheritance. And it wasn't it wasn't like a ton of money. But it was enough for me to buy one of the houses on the land that my family has in northwestern Indiana, and move there with my, at that time, wife and my first daughter, who was like maybe one at that time. And so then I started just like sending out letters looking for jobs. And the first place that got back to me was Ball State, and they said, "How would you like to teach in prison?" And I was like, "Well, I guess so. I mean, is it a real job?" And they're like, "Yeah, 4-year degree program. We need you up at Indiana State Prison in Michigan City." And I was like, "Oh, okay, that sounds good." And so that's what I did for my first 6 years. And I loved it.
Wow.
They were good students, and you could like, I got to see them semester after semester. So I got to see them grow as people and change, and then that ended because the state got rid of prison education at the college level. It was always kind of a hard sell, for the taxpayers. They didn't really like it too much.
Yeah.
But and then that's where my career just kind of went after that. I went down to North Carolina. I was at Fayetteville State for a couple of years, and then my now wife and I reconnected on Facebook, and she was up at the Culinary, and she wasn't coming down to North Carolina, so I left there and went up to be with her. And at that time, I had to become more entrepreneurial, because before that I'd just been kind of like a typical academic. But then I was just teaching part-time and finding out that I had skills. And I think you probably have a similar story with this, because of your background. You find out that you have skills that people will pay things for, and you're surprised. And then you're like, well, I guess I could figure out how to make a living doing this. And that's what I've been doing. I teach part-time. And then the other time I've got Reason.io, where I'm doing tutoring or philosophical counseling, or I've done some executive coaching with like CEOs and, the other C-suite executives, applying philosophy, which turns out to be quite useful for that. And, that's how I got here.
It's a great story. and the North Carolina connection. So we're in Chapel Hill.
Oh, okay.
So about an hour and 15 away from the Fayetteville area.
Yeah, I've been up there. There was a guy who was working at Duke, who I was good friends with at the time, and he's since been fired. Unfortunately, he was a theologian, and a really good one too. But he didn't kind of fit into where they were going with things, and I'd go up and visit him every once in a while. Yeah, a nice area.
Believe it or not, I was in the Duke Jazz Band in high school. I played drums.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The doctor, John Brown. He's a Juris Doctor. He's also an attorney.
Yeah.
Just awesome time, and got to play with some crazy world-class talented artists that would come in, like Monty Alexander and all these other. I'll send you a couple of YouTube videos. You get a kick out of it.
Yeah. I mean, have you been to Fayetteville recently?
The last time I was there was, I want to say, over a year ago, maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's pretty recently.
Was seeing one of my friends play at a venue, and I went down with my camera, just take a couple of shots for them.
Yeah.
It was kind of in and out, but that was the last time I was there.
It seemed like it was getting better around the time that I left, which was 2011, because it had been a place. I mean, they used to call it Vietnam, as you know, and
right,
it used to be kind of a rough place.
It's still, yeah, it still is. I mean, I don't really know I was kind of like in the downtown area, so it wasn't that bad, but there were definitely parts where when I was driving through, I was like, yeah, gets a little real.
Yeah. Yeah, they've got their challenges there. That's for sure. I actually taught in prison in North Carolina very briefly, over at Sampson Correctional Institute. I don't remember the town. It's like an hour east of Fayetteville. One of these small North Carolina towns that has like.
Was it close to the beach?
No, it was probably about half an hour still away from the coast.
Okay.
Yeah. And I got to say, I having been in a maximum security prison, I was not impressed with the medium security prison. You think that like you'd be safer in a medium security, but you're not. Because in a maximum security, everybody's very security conscious and everyone knows where they're supposed to go. And it's
Right.
long timers who are in there. So they've got like, you know, they've got some investment in what they're doing. Whereas in medium security, everything's a lot more fluid and the guards don't seem to be quite as on the ball, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
That must have been some experience, that whole that's incredible.
Yeah, it's I often got a couple different reactions from my like fellow professors
I'm
when they
sure.
find out about it.
I'm
One
sure.
one of them was kind of, you know, elitist, where they're like, oh, that's, you're not really doing real teaching, you're just teaching a bunch of rum dums, you know, not like us teaching regular college students. Um, but then a lot of them would have this extreme opposite reaction where they're like, oh wow, you're like an apostle doing God's work, you know. And I'd be like, but it's a job, you know. It's like any other teaching job. You go in and you got to make sure like you're actually getting some information there to the students and presenting it in a way that they can latch on to. And there's a lot more challenges, but I'm not doing, I wouldn't be doing this if I wasn't getting paid, you know. I'm not just a volunteer going in on my weekends to, I don't know, visit the prisoners, you know, out of some gospel imperative. I mean, it's a good thing to do that, but it was much more businesslike.
Right.
And then there were other people who'd worked in, you know, like they'd worked in other similar situations, not necessarily in a prison, and they got it. They were like, oh yeah, I see what you're doing. You know, this is good for cutting recidivism.
Mm-hmm.
You're giving them skills that they can use to manage conflict, or, you know, figure out where their life is going. Keep it up, you know. And I liked it because, you know, having come from kind of a rough, you know, making bad decisions background, I could have been there myself if things had gone differently. Um, so I could, you know, it wasn't like I'd go in there and feel like, oh, I'm so superior to these guys. I would never be this sort of person. I knew that I could have been that sort of person, and so it made me more empathetic towards them. You know.
Right. Right. I never knew that. When I was looking at the bio today, and I was surprised, all the
Hmm.
videos I've seen over the years, it just never really came up. But
I've only
that's
done, yeah, I've only done a few videos where I talked about it, and I probably should do more. You know.
well. Let's talk a little bit about your philosophy on philosophy, so to speak,
Oh
which is that's a whole other. We could be here with a mini series on that, but
yeah.
uh, I'm familiar with some of your takes on things, and you and I have a lot of similarities on kind of. And again, I don't know by far the amount of textual context and study that you've got under your belt, but from what I've heard, we have a lot of similarities in state of mind with that. But just kind of your thoughts on some of the classics, and just maybe folks that are just getting into philosophy, or artists that want to learn more about philosophy, kind of,
Oh yeah, yeah.
where to start,
Okay. Well, you know, I
and
will
your
say
opinion.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do have a set of videos in a playlist about self-directed study in philosophy, and I haven't done as many as I'd like, but there's like one on Plato and one on Aristotle and one on Cicero, and eventually I'm going to do like about maybe 40 or 50 of those to help people. Where I like say, okay, if you're going to study Plato, here's where you might start, and here's the books that you might want to get. Here's the things to keep in mind. But more generally, what I will say, especially to your audience who would be interested in studying philosophy, is that anybody can study philosophy. It's not something that we have to feel um, intimidated by. I mean, the texts are difficult, but there's a lot of resources out there that can help people with that. And you know, I've been teaching for 20 years now, in academic settings. And a lot of the places that I've taught, like Fayetteville State University, that's, those students are pretty challenged, same with the prison students. But what I've discovered is that if you go in and you teach the texts as if they're relevant to us in the present, and we get past the language barriers and some of the terminology that could hold us back, and we say, what can we actually get out of this, and what support students. So like the videos that I've shot, a lot of those are resources to help students who maybe they were there in class but they need to go back over it again, or maybe they had to miss a day because they were sick, or they had to take care of a kid, or they had an athletic thing to go to. I also give my students lesson pages and handouts and stuff like that. So what I tell them is, you're gonna have a hard time studying this, just like you would if you're going into the gym and you started weightlifting and you haven't done any weightlifting for a while. But if you stick with it and you just keep plowing away at it, and you don't damage yourself in the process by taking on too much, and you use the resources that are available for you, you will gain. You'll come away and you'll be able to say after a while, holy crap, I understand what Aristotle's saying. Look at this. And you'll also draw connections. You'll be like, wait a second, Descartes is saying something kind of similar, but also different to what Aristotle's saying. Holy crap, And you have these moments that I think are really important in people's lives. And again, we don't, where the elitist people would be like, well, of course you're understanding something that you should have understood a long time ago. But I think these sort of aha moments, these moments of realizing connection, are really important for students, and we should, I don't want to say celebrate them in kind of like the everybody gets a gold star kind of way, but we should make something of them and say, okay, yeah, you've accomplished something. Just like you've actually, now you can go up 10 flights of stairs without, being totally out of breath, for exercising. And so, I've started now incorporating this every semester. I give my students a pep talk at the beginning of the semester, kind of like that.
Right.
And it's helpful for them. And so I think that could be something helpful for your listeners and viewers, that it's not something that is beyond all of us, and it's part of our cultural heritage. It's something, it's not like Plato belongs just to the people who have all the money and the prestige and went to the right schools or something like that. He belongs to anybody who wants to pick him up and read along with it and keep going back to the text and talk, So, and long after you and I are gone, that dynamic will still be playing itself out. There'll be somebody who's picking up, hopefully we haven't destroyed the planet or something, but there'll be somebody who's picking up, Platonic texts and saying, holy crap, what is this stuff? And then they read their way into it, and they may not be speaking English. They may be speaking Chinese, or they're probably the ones most likely to come out on top in the long run, but it could be something else as well. But we'll still be part of this big continuity that is available to all of us. And so, you're talking about musicians. Musicians can read philosophy just as well as, trained philosophers or economists or whoever. It's just a matter of applying oneself. I'll actually tell you, if you don't mind, I got another story about a musician.
For sure.
So one of the guys who's probably retiring right now at St. Anselm College, his name is Monty Brown. He's a philosophy professor, and he grew up in California. He's, probably 20 years older than me, so he's probably pushing 70 now. And he went to he went to college in the University of California system. I'm not quite sure which place he went to. And in studying philosophy, like he had to take a couple philosophy classes, he never read Plato. And he didn't really read much other than analytic philosophy. He was also a really talented guitarist. And back then you could make enough money being kind of a bum and going from coffee shop to coffee shop and playing for, whatever money people would put in the hat in Southern California. And that's what he did for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Like couch hopping from place to place.
The busking thing works,
Yeah,
you can if you stick to it.
So he had a degree, and I don't know what it might have been in English literature or something like that. And then a friend of his gave him Plato's Dialogues and said, "Hey, man, you should read this stuff," And he did, and he was like, "Holy crap, this is amazing stuff. Why didn't anyone teach this to me?" And it was because of what they were interested in philosophy at the time. And so he decided, "Oh man, I'm going and I'm getting a philosophy degree." And he went on and got a master's, and then he got a PhD, and then he wound up in New Hampshire. I think that was he like right out of grad school. He got that job. And he's been teaching philosophy and studying philosophy ever since. But he could, if he hadn't had that friend who had said, and there's two things that friend did. The friend recommended Plato and said, "Hey, you'd probably like this." And his friend also had confidence that, "Hey, Monty, you're not a dummy. You're going to be able to make some sense out of this." Right? Because of that changed the whole trajectory of his life.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Just the framing of that, kind of like what you do in the beginning of the semester, so to speak, with the pep talk. People have to have the right frame when they go into things.
Yeah. And I think not only do they have to have the right frame, we also have to like trim away the wrong frames where, like a lot of philosophy people are like, "Oh, this is," if they're teaching undergraduates who are not philosophy majors, they sometimes approach it and they're like, you won't understand this sort of stuff. It's not for you. And that it's so stupid that people do that, because when we teach an intro to philosophy class or an ethics class or even critical thinking, that's the one chance that we get to actually speak on behalf of our profession and our interests and maybe reach people. Imagine if a musician was like playing in a bar and everybody comes in and then they're like, "Now this is only for the cultured people in here. I'm gonna play some I don't know what would be something hoity-toity in terms of like guitar stuff,
Steve Vai or something. I don't know. Just like
it's only for this one guy over there. All the rest of you dummies, close your ears." I mean, it would turn people off, right? So it wouldn't, and so we have to trim away that kind of stuff, I think, too.
I wanted to ask you real quick, and I think you actually answered this question already in your description earlier about working at Fayetteville and teaching, educating there. But YouTube, how did that start? Were those really just regimented classes that you were documenting for your students and you just kind of put them online, or was there really?
Yeah. And my wife was the catalyst for it, because she is a technology early adopter and she's kind of an optimist. And I'm kind of a, curmudgeonly conservative when it comes to stuff. I don't like to try new things. You might not know that from the videos, but I like to have things, set up in a certain way. And before I'm going to do something new, I want to know that there's going to be some likely payoff to it. So
you are I'm in the same boat, my friend, and I've had to. Yeah, no, I definitely get it. I can sympathize and empathize. Yeah.
So she bought me a flip cam back when there was actually a company called Flip, right?
Rectangle. Yeah.
Yeah. And so she bought it for me for my 40th birthday, and she was like, "Hey, you can document your trip with your kids," because by then I was divorced and doing the dad driving around kind of thing. And then I get back to school, and she's like, "You could try lecture capture. That would probably be helpful for your students." And I was like, "Oh, okay," and at that time, YouTube only allowed you to do 10 or 15
minutes.
Yeah. So I had to load it into the institutional channel. And so my early videos are all owned by Fayetteville State University, the critical thinking stuff. But all I would do is, actually, I've got one. I think I've got one of the tripods right here. Yeah, still in the box. You get like this little spider tripod.
Yeah.
And you plunk it down on a desk and just start the camera rolling. And I would do that. I was teaching 4 sections of the same class, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So 8 o'clock class, I'd plunk that one down. And every once in a while, like a student bump it, or they'd walk in front of it. And I didn't worry about the lighting or the sound quality or anything like that. But we uploaded these, and then people, I was like, well, my students will watch these, but nobody else is going to watch this, because I'm not a big name, and I'm not doing any high production or anything like that. And my wife, at that time, fiance, was like, just give it a try, And I was, okay, fine, I'll do it. And then all these people started like commenting on it. And the biggest comment was, my professor won't explain this stuff. Thank you for doing this. Like, you saved my grade,
Yeah.
And so then I started shooting a series that I called Dr. Sadler's Chalk and Talks. And that was a way of sticking it to the educational establishment, who at that time were saying, hey, if you do videos longer than 5 minutes, it's no good. They've got to be high production, and the lecture is dead. Chalk and Talk is dead. So I was sort of like, screw you guys. I'll do a talk for 15 minutes about this, and we'll see if anybody will watch it. And they did. And then when I left Fayetteville State University and I went up to Marist in New York, and I was teaching like intro and ethics, that's when I started, I do the same thing, put the video down. And it was really good for my students, because if they missed class, then they could see what we did, and people from all over the world were watching them and commenting on them, mostly positive. Sometimes you get some people who are critics there. And the critics come in different forms. Like, some of the critics are like, I can't believe that you talked about Aristotle and didn't mention this high level topic. And you're like, it's an intro class, but, and then you'd also get like the trolls,
Right.
I got a lot of, this guy looks like the dude, because I was letting my hair grow out, and I had the beard, and I also got a lot of, he looks like Penn, because I'm, kind of overweight, and I'd sometimes wear a suit and like have my hair in a ponytail. So it led to realizing that there was like an attention market out there for this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And so then people started requesting, hey, could you make videos about this and this? And so I was like, I guess so. You want videos about Hegel? So I started the Half-Hour Hegel Project. And and then over time, I've gotten, a lot smarter about it. So I mentioned, like sound quality, right? Now I actually use I should have been doing this years ago.
The lavalier, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So like my last maybe 3 years of videos are much better sound quality than the previous ones. What are you going to do? YouTube doesn't let you fix sound. So
the old school ones still are I just remember I was at Gold's Gym. Like my life basically, and it was funny because I was in New York.
Okay.
I think at the same time that you were, when I sent you a friend request on Facebook a few years back, I was in New York still working on my degree.
Were you in the city or?
Orange County. So like, right. I don't know if you know where the Hudson River line is, where Beacon's at. So it's kind of like parallel to Beacon, but on the west side of the river. So
I used to take the train down from Poughkeepsie into the city.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would get on at Beacon and go down to the city for acting work and auditions and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So, and I remember hearing, like, you had one video up and I heard the train in the background. I was like, wait a minute. He's got to be in New York. That sounds exactly like the New York train.
That's probably one of the ones that I shot at the Culinary Institute of America, which is like almost on the train tracks.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know why I brought that up. I was going somewhere with that, with New York. Oh yeah, Gold's Gym. So the older videos. It just so happened that I was taking I think it was like Philosophy 201 or whatever, that first philosophy course I had. I think it was still like a sophomore or junior. And the way that I went to William Peace University in Raleigh. It's a private college. And their curriculum, their online courses are traditionally 7 weeks. They're not 14. So it's twice as fast. Yeah.
Those are rough.
Yeah.
I teach those sometimes. And man. Yeah.
So I remember cramming a lot of information in, and it was between like making music, having my studio up there and producing. And then like half the week I would dedicate to straight schoolwork. And then the later end of the week, like Thursday through Sunday, if I can get all my schoolwork done Monday through Wednesday, Monday through Thursday, last 3 weeks, or 3 days, I'd focus on music and creative and all that. So, but I was always at Gold's Gym, I'd say 4 to 5 nights a week. And I was always there late when not a lot of people were there, and it was just kind of boring. So I'd put in the headphones, and sometimes it's Metallica, sometimes it's Motorhead, sometimes it's the Dr. Sadler channel. And it was even when I got out of Philosophy 201, like I got my A in philosophy, you helped me get that A, and it's like, man, I really love this. So I, like, for months and on end, I was just like still listening to, and they were the flip camera videos, just like really lo-fi vid. They were great. Like it was just
some of them you have to turn up real loud to hear it.
I'm sitting there squatting hundreds of pounds.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Aristotle. It's just stupid, hilarious. So anyway,
I listen to sometimes podcasts when I'm at the gym myself. Usually I'm listening to like metal stuff,
Right.
But I do. There's a couple podcasts out there that I listen to as well. So I get that.
I'll ask you this. I mean, there's so much ground we can still cover here. I won't get too long-winded with it. I'll bring this up. One of the things that I saw recently on your channel is has to do with the pandemic and kind of the psychology of what's going on. If you would care to elaborate for just a few minutes on that and get your take on it.
So I was invited to give a keynote address at this Psychology of Global Crises online conference housed at American University of Paris, which is still going on. Like the last day of it is tomorrow. And I thought, okay, well, what do I want to talk about? And I titled my talk, Complex Causality in Crises and Solidarity with the Vulnerable. And I'll just to keep it really short, the general idea is that when you have a pandemic, it's never just a pandemic, it's usually what we call a syndemic, where there's a number of different things going wrong at the same time. And it appears as a pandemic to people who are in a privileged position where things aren't that bad for them. But if you're already screwed in a number of other systematic ways, the pandemic is much worse. So like think about essential workers, right? Being classified as essential could be a good thing because you keep your job, but it could also be a very bad thing because now you're exposed to COVID much more often, and you may not have good working conditions or things like that. And so in Southern Indiana, they started using this word syndemic back in the early 2000s when they started researching, or actually around the 2010 or so. They looked at these collapses of communities where HIV, which is a big problem in Southern Indiana, and in Indiana in general, and opioid drug abuse, following on meth, which was the drug of choice down there for a long time. And they saw these communities where things just like imploded, and they would try drug treatment programs or HIV prevention things, and it just wouldn't work, It was sort of like whack-a-mole. You try to fix one thing and then another thing pops up. So that's what they call syndemics, where you've got all these different things coming together, like it's people having diabetes and also being in generational poverty, and we can go on and on and on. So when we're in a pandemic like we're in now, a crisis, we want to avoid the temptation of oversimplifying things. Like saying, oh, we should just reopen the economy, as if the economy is a simple like on-off switch that we click.
Right.
And if we do that, if we start looking, so this is the philosophical concept of cause, right? A cause is an answer to the question why. And when we realize how complex the causality is, we don't have to like understand everything altogether, but we can understand how these different factors come together. We see that some people are way more screwed than other people. And from an ethical perspective and leadership perspective, we should be focusing more on them and caring less about whether people can get haircuts or not,
From like a utilitarian standpoint, or
you could look at it. Yeah. I think, you could look at it in a straight out utilitarian way, and then you would end up favoring those who are most negatively impacted and most placed at risk. But you could also look at it deontologically, like we have a duty to
right,
focus on those who are most
right.
at risk, and you could say that it fits in with virtue ethics too.
I was
So
just going to say virtualistic. Yeah.
yep. So that was what I did. And actually I was talking with a friend of mine who's a psychologist, and does a lot of trauma work with kids, just earlier today before we got on. And he was asking me how the presentation went. And I said, I don't often do things out of my comfort zone anymore. Usually I'm presenting, I get in front of this chalkboard and I know what I'm doing.
Right.
And people invite me to give talks about Stoicism or about Hegel. And okay, I'll do that again. Having to put this one together, I knew that what I was talking about was real. And I had a harder time articulating what I wanted to say and how the parts fit in together when I was recording it. And so I wasn't looking forward to the Q&A session, because I was like, people are going to be like, this guy sucks. He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, and I went in anyway, and it went fine. And I realized I need to do more things every once in a while that take me out of my normal comfort zone. So I don't know what that will be, but it was a good experience to do that.
If you want, we can make this more uncomfortable.
How would we do that?
I don't know.
See, I mean, that's the thing though. I'm used to like doing this back and forth.
Right.
Things, because I've been talking in Skype. Now Zoom is a little bit newer to me, but I've been talking with clients in Skype since like 2013.
Yeah.
I'm doing online classes, so this isn't that tricky. There's other. I suppose there could be topics or something where you'd push me on it. But I mean, and we've got a good rapport here too, so that makes
that already decreases the likelihood of
exactly. And I'm not saying that everything has to be out of the comfort zone, but and in terms of music, I'm a pure amateur. I play two instruments. One is the banjo, and I don't play traditional banjo music. It was my dad's old banjo, so I like play rock and roll or metal stuff with it. I get the guitar chords and then sing over it. And
metal
then I've got
banjo.
Well, kind of as metal as you can get a banjo to sound. I mean, like Motorhead songs and Judas Priest songs.
Yeah, for sure.
And I've thought about like, should I ever try to perform this stuff? Well, I would have to practice a lot more so I wouldn't, screw it up. But that might be something that I'll do someday to get out of the comfort zone. Record some videos with.
Well, here's what we'll do. In the event, you already know where this is going. In the event that the world opens up,
okay,
when the band comes through, if I'm assuming you're in the Milwaukee area,
yeah.
Well, we'll coordinate. We'll figure out what song you want to come up and jam with us on. We'll make it happen.
That would be a lot of fun. Yeah.
Do a little Motorhead or something, like Ace of Spades. I do an Ace of Spades version. It's a little bit slower, and I kind of change the key with it. It's a little bit more subdued. It's pretty cool, like with acoustic guitar.
Yeah. That's a great song.
Oh, it's great. I love, and especially like the Mickey D era of Motorhead, like the Bastards record and all that. Oh, so good, so good.
Yeah, it's too bad that it's been a couple of years now that Lemmy's been
2015,
gone.
I think. Yeah.
Is it that long?
Yeah, can you believe it?
Wow.
Yeah, it's really and it was the ones that really got me were Lemmy, Prince.
Dio.
Prince was the year after, and then we lost Ray Manzarek and John Lord in the same year, which were my two biggest keyboard guys, freaking Deep Purple and the Doors, same year.
John Lord did a lot of producing and coordinating things for other artists too.
I'll have to dive into that. I didn't even know.
I came to realize that. So I mentioned earlier that I did this class session on the Sabbath Purple Nexus. And what I mean by that is like they kind of churned out all these other bands because
Right.
of like taking people in and kind of spitting them out. So like Rainbow, Whitesnake, Gillan had his own band for a while. That's pretty good. Two important solo acts of Ozzy and Dio. And Lord produced a lot of people's stuff for these musicians who are coming up. Ian Pace did too.
Oh,
And
incredible drummer.
Lover
Oh my
too.
God.
Yeah.
Incredible. He was the one that started it for me. That Machine
really?
Head record. Oh yeah. Yeah. That was the seminal. I mean, I was into music. I was taking lessons at 4 and my parents like threw me into the whole thing, the whole enchilada. But that when I was 13, 12, 13, somewhere around that time frame, it was right after, actually it might've been before that. Cause it was right when the cowbell skit happened with SNL.
Oh.
And I'll tell this. I've said this story before on the show. I'll give you a quick cliff notes on it. We were doing a family road trip and we stopped at like Barnes and Noble or Borders or back when you still bought CDs.
Yeah.
It was obviously post 2001, it was probably like 03, 04, 05. And I used to watch Cowbell Skid on repeat because we recorded on VHS. So I was like heavy into Blue Oyster Cult, but I only knew Don't Fear the Reaper. I didn't know anything else. So
yeah,
like I want to get a Blue Oyster Cult CD. My dad's like, oh, okay, all right, cool, whatever. So
you know what I thought would make a really funny playlist sometime? It would be called Just Enough Cowbell, and it would include like Don't Fear the Reaper and like Motley Crue's Live Wire and
right.
all these other songs where cowbell plays
Hair
very
of the dog and
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So we're in the store and he goes, are you sure you want this? And I was listening to like greatest hits of Blue Oyster Cult. I was like, yeah, I'm sure I want it. Yeah. He's like, you sure? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, all right, before I get this for you, I want to show you a couple of things. And he finds this CD with, it's kind of like these meshy 5-figure looking guys. And it's this kind of like weird, creamy gray, purple. And you flip it over and there's this bass neck headstock thing and it's Machine Head. And I was like, the world, Deep Purple Machine. What is it? He puts it on the scanner and it kicks in at some point in Highway Star because they only gave you like those little samples.
Yeah.
And all that stuff. And like, the I didn't know what harmonic minor was at the time, but the harmonic minor solo in the middle. And it was just like, what in the world? So that was, and then obviously with the drumming side of things, like Pictures of Home, that just like totally destroyed me. That beginning of, that song with the triplets and all that. So that's the story. Like it's like to put everything together very quickly. That was it. And that lit me up.
Yeah. I got when I was in high school is when Perfect Strangers came out.
Okay.
And I'd heard Deep Purple songs on the radio, obviously, from time to time, but I'd never kind of like knew exactly who was singing this or who was doing what. And then they finally reunited and came out with that. And it was such a great album.
Oh, yeah.
And then suddenly it like clicked and I was like, oh, that's those guys.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a video of John Lord doing the Lazy solo, but it's extended and it's like, it was like maybe live in Tokyo or one of those. It's on YouTube somewhere. It's just, it's incredible. Yeah. Incredible.
Now it's not quite Deep Purple, but recently we saw Uriah Heep play here in Milwaukee, and they don't have their original keyboardist who unfortunately died years ago. But they still do have Mick Box and all these other people, and they maintain some pretty good continuity. And man, is it fun to see, like, say, Gypsy or some of these other really heavy songs perform live, and to see the keyboardist really getting
Oh,
into it,
yeah.
you know? I mean, and now, you know, we use the word keyboardist. Back then they called him an organist.
Right.
And I think there really was something to that kind of like, you know, all hammering, playing to, you know, there was a physicality that isn't there when you talk about keyboards,
What
perhaps.
was the greatest live show that you've seen, or maybe a
Oh,
few?
wow. That is a good question.
I always ask the artists this because it always strikes up an
Yeah.
interesting conversation. And I always ask them for their gigs. I always ask best and worst gigs experiences.
Yeah.
You know, in your, well, and you've played, so maybe you do have a.
Well, as a complete amateur though, you know, um, I would actually say my favorite show was seeing Rat fairly recently down in Chicago when they now they don't have the guitarists anymore. They had, you know, they had the core of Stephen Percy, vocalist,
Mhm.
Juan on bass, and he's also the second vocalist, and you don't have the Rat sound without him. But then Warren DeMartini and Carlos Cavazo on guitar, because those guys are friends. So Cavazo is replacing Robin Crosby, who died, you know, a long time ago. And I forget who they had on drums, but it was somebody who really fit. And it was you know, good acoustics. I mean, that makes such a big difference. If the
Oh, yeah.
hall isn't set up well, you know,
Yeah.
it can be a great band. Or if it's not mixed well, it turned out to be mixed well. And I'd never seen Rat on stage before. I missed it, you know, when they were here in the 80s and stuff. And it was a really fun show. They played a great representative set from their catalog. And I never realized just how physical Juan Croce is with his bass. I mean, the guy was like flipping it around and sort of dancing while he's playing. And some people don't like that. There's a lot of reviews of him there. What is this clown doing? You know? But for me, I'm like, holy crap, this guy is like probably 60 and he's, you know, he's doing all this amazing physical moves, not missing any notes, and also singing, you know. And Warren DeMartini is a guitarist, you know, it's always nice to listen to him. Now, of course, shortly after that, they fired Warren.
Mm.
And, you know, you get the idea that Stephen Percy is kind of like Gene Simmons, hard to get along with in some respects, good business sense, but, you know, and when Warren went, that meant that Carlos Cavazo was like, well, I'm not sticking around. And then the drummer quit. So now they got these three young guys who I don't know if they fit or not.
Right.
So I was really happy to actually get to see them. And I did that with, you know, with my wife, and we bought a shirt and, you know, had a couple beers. So it was a really great time. I don't know what the worst show that I saw was. I can say this. We saw AC/DC in '89, I think it was, in Madison. And there was a band called Love Hate at that time that was opening for AC/DC.
I feel like I've heard of this band for some reason. I don't know why.
I think it was like a super band. They took a bunch of musicians, sort of like Mr. Big was, you know, with Billy Sheehan.
Yeah.
So the crowd was not happy with Love Hate, and they got booed off the stage after like 3 songs. And I think part of it was everyone was there to see AC/DC.
Right.
You know, it's very hard to, like, you know, to be the opening band for some of these really successful acts. But I you know, I was listening to them and I was like, they don't seem that interesting. I don't like their stuff, but I don't hate it. But people were like, really, you know, they were like, get the fuck off the stage, you know. I'm surprised they weren't like throwing bottles or stuff, you know.
Right.
Because it was still the 80s, so you could get away with that.
Yeah.
Kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then AC/DC came on and did a good show like they usually do. Haven't seen them in years myself, you know, but we used to see them every time they'd come on tour.
I saw some of the, well, I didn't see them live, but I saw Axl with AC/DC.
How was that?
I didn't see it live, but from what I've seen, I was like,
Yeah.
Man, he's still got it.
Interesting.
Yeah. I can't claim that the tour was a huge success. I'd have to look at the statistics and just talk to people that saw it. But from the videos I've seen online, it's like Wow.
It's one of those combinations where you're like, well, that doesn't seem like a natural fit, you know. But if it worked out, it worked out. I mean, there's plenty of other cases where bands brought somebody in, and you're like, what the hell are they doing, you know? And then it turns out pretty good, you know.
We saw a Journey with the new singer way whenever that was, which is, I say, way back now. It's almost 8 years ago when we saw them. But that was another. It was incredible. Yeah, he sounds very, very much like Steve Perry. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it's interesting with these older bands that are still on tour. You think like, well, you can't replace these original members. Well, it turns out you can.
Yeah.
Well, something that maybe you can, I don't know if you've heard about this, but I've heard rumors that Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley want to franchise Kiss out in this way. They've got Tommy Thayer and Eric Carr, you know, that got brought in as replacements a long time ago. And they're essentially, you know, hired guns to keep doing that. I heard that they want to get somebody else to play Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley and have them in there. And then, you know, they wouldn't be doing Kiss anymore, but they'd be like still managing it and deriving the income from it. And the players would essentially be like a Kiss tribute band that is officially licensed by Kiss.
Right.
It's kind of an interesting idea.
He talks about that in his book a little bit.
Does he? Okay.
I vaguely remember him saying something to the. Well, of course, he's always talking business, so he's always looking for the next licensing. I don't want to say scheme, but it is.
No, I think that's perfectly appropriate.
I think that might be a. Yeah, no, you've got to check. I'll send you a couple of links to those on Amazon.
Okay.
Really, really interesting stuff. While I'm looking at my list here, we'll jump back to philosophy for a second. And I had a lot of stuff I wanted to cover, but I don't think we're going to be able to get to all of it.
We can always do another session down the line sometime.
Sure. Yeah, part two. I'll ask you this. I have a couple of things written down here. I wanted to get your opinion on, and again, you've talked about this in your videos, but your opinion on existentialism versus positivism, and just kind of your thoughts on those two worlds, and in layman's terms for people that aren't familiar with those.
Yeah.
You know, and you can correct me. I'll take the liberty to say that it's more metaphysical versus physical.
I mean,
at least from my professor when he taught me way back, that was kind of how he put it.
Yeah, there's a movement called logical positivism that was really big in analytic philosophy in the early 20th century. It's more or less dead now. Although I do actually have a good Twitter friend who is a logical positivist, and he's kind of like the lone voice crying in the wilderness. But there's this broader positivist project, and sometimes it gets called by a different term, scientism, or, you know, things along those lines, where the idea is that we need to, like you said, get rid of metaphysics totally, and along with that, any sort of religious claims as well, because those can't be directly verified. And we focus just on what's, you know, what can be what we can get from like ordinary experience and the sciences, and that will solve all of the problems that can be solved for human beings. And I think there's an attitude like this that does pop up and doesn't get called positivism, but really does fit that bill every so often. You know, it's like you see the same philosophical, I mean, it's sort of like in music too, right? Again, we've done a lot of sort of back and forth. There's like the retro thing, you know, and then nobody actually, the people who are in the know, they're like, yeah, I know exactly where that's coming from. But everyone else is like, wow, this is fresh and new. You know? So the same thing happens with positivism. The people who are like, neuroscience will unlock the secrets for everything, they're just doing like the same shtick that positivists did back in the day with, well, psychology will solve everything, or this will solve everything, you know? And so it's a recurring theme, you could say. Existentialism, I guess you can say that's also a recurring thing. So existentialism is a little bit more loosey-goosey, though. You know,
Right.
some of the key existentialists denied being existentialists, but we say, yeah, they're still existentialists anyway, like Albert Camus or Martin Heidegger. Or
Dostoevsky, was he kind of in that
he
a little
was an
bit?
existentialist, but he didn't know that term. Because
Well, he was more on the forefront of when that was
exactly,
coming
yeah,
to fruition.
and interestingly, there were people already in the late 18th century, or 19th century, sorry, and the early 20th century that were seeing the commonalities between Kierkegaard, Dostoevsky, and Nietzsche. There was even a guy who was a German, he was a literature professor, Georg Brandes, who recommended Dostoevsky to Nietzsche. And Nietzsche
Wow.
read Dostoevsky and was like, yeah, we're kind of on the same page here. This guy's he called him a great psychologist, which was a compliment from him. But then by 1900, there's this guy, Lev Shestov, who doesn't get read very much anymore, but he's very important in the existentialist spectrum. And he writes a book called Nietzsche and Dostoevsky, where he notes the commonalities between them. And then he later writes about Kierkegaard. And so, yeah, you've got this like whole continuity going on. The other thing I'll say about existentialism, so I got really into existentialism when I was like, fresh out of the army and like buying used books. I picked up a few here and there. And then I got into philosophy in college, and the people who were teaching philosophy at my college thought that was cutting edge stuff, even though it was like 50 years behind the times. And so what the hell would I know? So I'm like, yeah, this seems pretty good. And I latched onto all those themes that an adolescent and a 20-something will catch on to, like everybody's a phony, and you got to be authentic, and probably you want to party a lot and have some sex and have a good time, because that's how you experience life, right? You get to the depths of things.
Right.
And so all of it, I ignored all the other themes in existentialist stuff at that time.
The face slapping.
Yeah, and so I was latching onto the things that kind of fit that age mentality. And then when I started going back to existentialist literature in my late 30s and early 40s, I was like, holy crap, there's all this stuff that I missed. There's a lot of depth to this, and this can speak to me now. So I think there's almost like two different kinds of existentialism. There's the existentialism that appeals, rightly so, to young people. And so that's why you can always have an existentialist class in a philosophy curriculum, because they'll take the class and then they'll be like, yeah, this helps me make sense out of my life. And then there's the deeper stuff that you get once you've actually got enough life experience and probably been, bounced around and beaten up by life enough to no longer think that you know it all. Then you can like read Dostoevsky and get more out of it, or read Kafka, or whoever. That's my take on it, at least.
Well, I think it's a great analysis. I got into that type of even before college. So when I was like, and I'll make this really, really brief. When I was 17 years old, I went through my junior year of high school. I got diagnosed with something called Giardia, which is like a third world parasitic thing in your intestine. And I mean, this thing was it was crazy. I dealt with, I was symptomatic for months, and it even lingered I would say for 2 years after that. I was still dealing with kind of just inflammation and it really it sounds kind of like mushroom-esque, but I mean, it really changed the way that I looked at the world and thought about things. I hit some very, very lows, very, very low depressing points, and was just going through that, and kind of went through a blues renaissance, rightfully so. Was the only way I could really cope with what was going on was just playing and practicing 6, 10, 12 hours a day, and recovering and just trying to make sense of everything. So that was really how I got into that side of things. I never really looked at it from more of the experience side of it. For me, it was really the deeper part of it of why am I here? Why am I going through like all of those big things?
Yeah.
You know,
Is life totally bereft of meaning? You know? Yeah. That's, I mean, you had sort of an existential shock to the system in going through that. A lot of young people think they really are invulnerable, and you know, it's incorrect, of course, because none of us are, right? But you know, you can hear that, and you know, people can say, oh, you should take care, you know, you're not invulnerable like you think you are, and you understand that cognitively, but most teenagers don't understand that emotionally, or in terms of like an actual state of things. Having something like that drives it home to you. This is the human condition. It can suck very quickly for you and stay sucking.
the unknown was the frightening part, because it wasn't as if, because I had friends that had, I mean, I lost 30 pounds in a month, and it wasn't explainable. It was really this tumultuous, emotional, psychological, physical, like everything was just, it was crazy. And I had friends of mine that they were going through similar things, but they were tangible. And I just kept saying, it's like, man, it's like, if I had cancer or something that was diagnosed, it took them months to diagnose what it was and find out what it was. And it's like, it led me to that thought process of, I kind of wish I had this, so I actually was able to define what was going on. And then, you know, even with the diagnosis, they still didn't know. They just said, here, try taking these pills. And fortunately, it started to subside, and it was maddening. It was wild.
Yeah, that would, as they say, that would leave a mark, you know?
Yeah. And here we are today.
I was
for better or for worse.
Yeah. I was thinking about this recently. I mentioned my dad died when I was 11, and he died at the Mayo Clinic, and he died of what they called fever of unknown origin, which meant they just, you know, they had a symptom, and they said, well, we don't know where this came from. And they spent like 3 months trying to figure out what was wrong with him. And it might have been something genetic. It might have been something he caught somewhere. We'll never know. I mean, that was back in '82. So, you know, medical science has progressed so much since then. And I remember, you know, trying to explain this to people back then, and doing kind of a bad job at it, because I was not a particularly articulate kid. And everybody wanted an explanation, you know. And I couldn't give it to him. And I remember that feeling of not guiltiness, but there was something wrong that I couldn't give an explanation. But who the hell could have? The Mayo people couldn't, you know. So, and then I was thinking about that recently, and now that I've actually got a little bit more time on my hands, the semester's over, and realized that what a kick in the pants that was, to not have, like you were saying, a framework to put things in, that where it would still suck, but it would make sense.
Right.
Know?
Right.
Yeah.
And speaking along the lines of that, I'll throw this one at you. Acrasia was kind of that was a big term that was getting thrown around in my class, and the weakness of the will argument and all of that, you know, just some of your thoughts on perhaps the Socrates
versus Aristotle, and
all of that. Yeah.
I'll do that, and then I'm actually I unfortunately going to have to go, because I've got to take care of some things. But I don't buy the nobody ever suffers a crosshair weakness of will or failure of will, because we experience it all the time. I mean, we know what the right thing is, and we find ourselves not doing it. And you could say, oh well, you don't really know. No, I know. I'm a screw up, you know, and I can wean myself away from that, but it takes work. And so I'm much more attracted to Aristotle's views on it, which is that, you know, on one side we have being virtuous, And that's when we've made something part of our character. And so like we respond appropriately in terms of thinking the right way and feeling the right way. And it becomes kind of second nature. And then we got being vicious, where we're screwed up in some way, like being greedy. And we actually see things the wrong way and feel things the wrong way. And then in the middle, we've got being self-controlled or encratic, being masters of ourselves, where we like force ourselves to do things we don't want to do. Like when I go to the gym, I don't like to do arm and leg curls. I don't like those exercises, but I make myself do it, because I know it's good for me. And then we have being acratic, where we're not vicious, but if we don't watch it, we will become vicious, because we don't exercise the self-control that we need. So like, when we go to the buffet, and we're like, well, I've had 3 servings and I'm probably going to have dessert. I probably shouldn't load my plate up one more time. And you're thinking of this to yourself as you're walking up to the buffet, right? And then you're like, yeah, I shouldn't take too much of this stuff. Like Chinese buffets are the worst for that, right? Because there's so many nice things to eat.
Oh yeah.
Or Thai is bad too that way. And you know that you're not supposed to do that. So there's something that cognitively you're fine. Desire wins, and we can, Aristotle, another good thing about Aristotle is he says we can be acratic not just in terms of pleasure or pain that we want to avoid. We can be acratic in terms of anger. Like think about how often because we're ticked off at somebody, we allow ourselves to do things that we wouldn't ordinarily think are okay. Right. But then he goes on and he says people are acratic with respect to their children. There's a lot of stuff where human beings will make decisions on the basis of like it's good for their kids that they wouldn't do if their kids weren't involved. So like I wouldn't I don't know, maybe take on a certain unsavory job, but if it means advancing my kids, then I'll do that.
It changes the intent or the motive.
Exactly. And so it's easy to be acratic with that, because and it could be like not just kids, it could be like, I don't know, our colleagues or friends or anybody who we're attached to provides an opportunity if we don't really pay attention to what we're doing ethically, for us to go astray. And it seems like it's for a good motive, but it can also steer us towards vice. So you become greedy because you're just looking out for your kids.
That's really interesting. We'll definitely have to, if we ever do a part 2 on this, I would.
We can definitely do that. Yeah,
would love to get into your take on that whole idea of extrinsic motivators, perhaps, or just and I think we've all been there, where there's certain things like, why am I doing this for such and such when I can't do it for myself? And is it because of societal pressure? Is it because of the ego stepping in or stepping up perhaps and going, no, we're gonna get this done, and I gotta prove to so and so, and it's like, well, why am I stepping up now? You know what I mean? It's the human being is a complex animal, and I'll this might be a good thing to sort of go out on. I often tell my students and clients that ethics is not about just figuring out what the right rules are and then following them and making the right calculations. It's in large respect, it's a figuring out what do we do with ourselves as these screw-ups that we are, and the lives that we've managed to kind of halfway get right and halfway screw up. How do we move ourselves towards like screwing up only 25% of the time? And how do we unscrew up the parts that we've ruined before? That's where I think ethics really gets the most interesting. Well, I believe it was Aristotle when he talks about virtue from the practicality standpoint, the habitual aspect of it. You practice virtue, and I think you talked about that in a couple of your videos over the years. Of you have to practice it, and it's tough.
Yeah, and there's also a use it or lose it kind of aspect to it.
Yeah.
Right? So you're virtuous at the start, but if you don't keep it up and pay attention to what you're doing, you're inevitably going to stray away from it.
Yeah. It's such great stuff, and flourishing and all of that. Like we'll definitely get more into this at a later date. I do want to ask you one last question
Sure.
that I ask everybody, which is, if you could go back in time to your 15-year-old self, knowing what you know now, what what would you tell him?
Well, I would. I mean, I'd probably say, "Man, you're a screw up," but that wouldn't be very helpful. But I think actually that's a great question. Now that I think about it, and you've probably had other guests who've said similar things. I would probably say 3/4 of the stuff that you're worried about is bullshit that is never going to matter in the
Yeah.
end. Relax,
Yeah.
take things less seriously. That would be what I'd say to 15-year-old me. I was, there were so many things that I thought mattered that didn't matter.
Right. Right.
So I'm curious, have you had other guests who said that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'll tell you this. I mean, I'm in my mid-20s, but I still feel like it's always applicable to regroup and reflect.
Yeah.
Now the major thing for me, I'm talking about virtue. I'm really, really honing in on this right now in my life. Is if it's not going to matter in 5 years, stop thinking about it.
Yeah, that's a really good metric to use.
And I mean,
say.
with moderation, because anything could go off the rails. But I think it all is relevant.
Yeah, being able to put things in perspective is a really important life skill. Again, one that we don't teach at all in school.
Well, this has been fantastic. Real quick, while we go out, we'll have in the description box all of your materials, reasonio.com or whatever the website handle is, and YouTube channel. You've got Wisdom for Life that's in the works. We were talking about that right before we went on live.
That's our radio show. Yeah, we've got 10 episodes in at this point.
Reason.io Academy. Anything going on there?
There should be, but there won't. There's a few classes available. I'm bringing out more classes this summer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So coming soon.
Yeah, exactly.
It's good to know. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. I really enjoyed this myself.
We'll pick up with this at some point soon. You guys have been watching and listening to the Jason Damico show, and definitely check out Greg's material down below in the description box for those of you that are watching, listening on YouTube, to the sides for those of you on Spotify, iTunes, iHeart, and all the other ones. And we will see you all on the next episode. Peace.